Welcome to the Business Series podcast. My name is Ankush Jain, and I am a state of mind coach working with businesses and individuals. On each episode of this series, I'll be speaking to a coach or trainer on a different topic relevant to your career or personal development. Enjoy. Welcome back to another episode of the Business Series podcast. Today I'm joined by Ken Manning, PhD, who is the co-founder and president of Insight Principles, which is a consulting company bringing basic principles behind how the mind innately functions to global companies around the world. We've interviewed a couple of his colleagues already, Sandy Crott and Robin Charbit, and they all specialize in helping companies achieve excellent business results and healthy corporate cultures. Which is very apt because today our podcast is all about achieving excellent results in business. Thank you for joining me, Ken.
Oh, you're welcome. Nice to be here, Ankush. Thanks for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure, and I'm very excited about this episode. I know you have a lot of experience working with organizations and really achieving some quite remarkable changes and turnarounds. And I thought maybe we could just jump into this straight away and kind of go on the opposite side and say, well, why don't more people and businesses achieve excellent business results? You know, we've had years and years of management training and thinking and literature and everything else. So why isn't this more commonplace?
Well, I always say to businesses, the businesses would do really well if it weren't for the people. The joking aside, people don't know how to use their minds really well. And you have to use your mind to do everything that you do. And if you don't know how it works and how to use it well, your personal efforts will be variable. And if a group of people's efforts are variable, often the collective will sink to some low average of effectiveness that produces mediocre results. Whereas, you have some teams that don't really know how the mind works, but they're in great spirits. They're all wonderfully healthy people. They're inspired. They're excited about what they do, and they get great business results for a period of time. But then over the long run, things start to erode, or they get bigger and the quality of the results start to erode. And they're really puzzled why, because they think they have a great product. But what they don't realize is that their quality of their human functioning, and the way they use their mind and the way their people use their minds, goes down over time. And they wonder why, they started a great business and all of a sudden it's kind of feeling kind of flat. Or they're in a big corporation and they had a great leader for a while, but now that person's gone and things are flat. So it's because people don't understand where their experiences are coming from, where their best qualities come from, and how to keep that really fresh. And when you really understand how your mind works, that happens. That's what happens. You get to stay really fresh, keep clearing out whatever gets in the way, and find yourself using your best intelligence. So I think that's at the heart of the way I say it.
So to summarize, what you're saying is the reason why excellent business results are not more commonplace is because one of the most vital resources that companies, organizations, businesses have, the people, we're often told people are the most valuable asset we have. What you're saying is that asset is not functioning at the optimal level because people don't understand how their mind works.
Right, and there's not usually a science or a knowledge of how to keep that resource operating at its best. So there's a lot of superstition, actually, about what helps people be at their best. But when you really understand how it works, it's not superstition, it's practical and logical.
So my next question was going to be, how do you achieve excellent business results or excellent results in business? I'm assuming you're going to say you help people understand how the mind works. So why don't we jump into that? What is it about the science of the mind that people don't understand, which if they did, would fundamentally shift their bottom line results?
There's new knowledge that's come into the field of psychology and business leadership in the last 25 years, based on the work of Sydney Banks, which I'm sure your listeners have heard of before. And this knowledge explains the basic principles or the basic functions operating in the human mind that are responsible for intelligence, clear perception, insight, and wisdom. And those principles are sort of the firmware operating system on top of which our thinking and our interactions with other people operate. A lot of the leadership training and human science that people have been aware of are correlations and attempts to guess at what helps people be at their best, like having a good purpose, like having open, honest relationships with each other, like having inspiring leaders. I mean, these are all good things to have. Or having personality assessments like the Myers-Briggs or the DISC or leadership circle profile. These are all fabulous tools to understand where your strengths and weaknesses are, how to compensate for them, and how to interact with each other based on these different styles. But underneath all of that is the basic operating system that people don't really understand. And the essence of that basic operating system is that our whole experience of life is generated from the inside out by the way the basic principles of our mind operate. And within that set of basic operating principles is a brilliant living intelligence that is designed to generate insight, clarity, and well-being, which then flows into good relationships and healthy business activities from the inside out. And when people come to understand how that actually works, a lot of the noise in business settles down. And then a lot of the differences in style or strengths and weaknesses get handled in a very graceful and intelligent way within the company, naturally and effortlessly. Am I answering your question, Ankush?
You are, and you started to answer the next question that I had, which is, could you explain a bit more about why this is a big deal? So a lot of my listeners might not know about these basic operating principles you're talking about. So why is it a big deal that we are creating our experience from the inside out? What's the implication of that?
In business, one of the primary implications is that mental clarity is necessary to handle the complexity of doing business. You have your task at hand, you have people you have to interact with, you have the marketing, you have the economic forces, you have customers, you have leadership, you have layers of the organization. I mean, it's just so much going on. In business, if your head is not clear, it's hard to keep all of that in perspective and do the right thing, or to see intelligently what to be doing and to prioritize, etc. Now, the thing that keeps people from having a clear mind is their own thinking. If it weren't for people's thinking, they'd have a clear mind. Duh. I mean, it's just common sense, right? Now, what is it that gets people's mind full of thinking that is extraneous and unnecessary? Well, what fills people's heads are a lot of reactions that they have to situations, to other people, to time, to the lack of time, to deadlines, to their to-do lists, to things that they don't like about other people, to things they'd rather be doing rather than being at work, et cetera, et cetera. People's heads are filled with all of these things. And people believe that their head needs to be filled with all of those things to deal with the external environment that appears to be causing them to have all of these thoughts. But the true nature of the human mind is that there's nothing outside of us that determines what happens inside of our thinking. It only looks like the outside world or other people or events or the past or the future can make us think certain ways or feel certain ways. And when people start to understand how the mind works, they start to realize that their thinking is 100% between them and them. We say this to our clients all the time. Your experience of life is between you, and that's it. And if you understand how thought works and how the intelligence of the mind operates with thought, you stop blaming your people and circumstances for the quality of your thinking and for the amount of your own thinking. And when you start to wake up to the nature of how the mind works, you start having a separateness, not a disconnection, but it changes your relationship to what's happening around you. So you're less reactive, and you're less appears that you're at the mercy of things. And when you realize that, you start having a lot less thinking. And when you start having a thinking that's not useful, it's a lot easier to let go of it, because you realize so-and-so who did X that you didn't like didn't make you have a reaction. You just did that yourself. Or you're feeling stressed and anxious about deadlines because there's so much to do and not enough time. You realize that all your stress and anxiety is just your own thinking clouding your mind. Or if you're there worrying about, your family or something coming up, and you see that it's just being generated by your thinking, it's a lot easier to let go of it if you really realize that it's just thinking. So when people wake up to the nature of how the mind works, they stop blaming their thinking on the world and start managing it in a much healthier way on the inside. And then when people start to realize the deep intelligence operating within their mind, they start to realize that their mind is designed to have really intelligent clarity and insight all the time. And when they start living with that understanding, it gives a great sense of ease, patience, and faith in their own minds and in life, that they will have the intelligence to respond moment to moment as things arise. And when people start living in that feeling, they notice that life tends to work out really well. And if they have to work hard to get things done, they'll have the energy and the insight to do it gracefully, without push and without stress. And what happens is people start having a different life, finding themselves clear most of the time and being much more productive. Now, the reason that this is so different than other things is that a lot of other things point to these simple truths, like you shouldn't be a victim. You always have the power on the inside. When you're inspired, you'll be creative. And these are all true. But if you look at what the deeper understanding is behind most of those trainings, they're all about how to better cope with the environment, rather than to actually understand the brilliance of your system operating from the inside out. So that's a primary difference.
Do you have a case study where you have worked with an organization or a business, pointed them to how the employees' minds work, or the leadership how their minds work, which has led to a shift, really quite a tangible shift in their business results that you could speak about?
Yeah, sure. We had a company that a large $65 billion company that had been operating for 100 years, and they had a lot of Six Sigma training and a lot of lean manufacturing training, and they had to take $1 billion out of their operating budget. And with all of the lean and Six Sigma efforts, they couldn't figure out how to get any more money out of what they'd been doing. They had plants all over the world. They had lots of capital issues. So the leader had heard about what we do, and he brought us in to meet with his top 22 leaders from around the world. most of them managing different sites. And we explained to them that there's another way of looking at the human experience, another way of understanding how the mind works, and a different way of operating with each other that would enable them to find the path to that $1 billion. So we had them for 4 days, and we showed them how the mind works from the inside out. And we showed them how that frees up a great flow of insight. So they were quite cantankerous and a bit resistant and skeptical. And it was really fun we love it when we work with skeptical people because we know that what we have to share with them is true and all they have to do is look. So we were able to show them how the mind works. And the skeptical people became really big fans and champions of what we were saying and helped lead the process. And after 2 days of helping them realize how their minds work in this deeper way, they organized themselves into groups to find the big areas where they might be able to find some savings. They whittled it down to 5 areas that looked promising. They then grouped the 22 people into 5 groups that logically went with those 5 different categories and spent a day and a half getting a remarkable set of insights that logically looked like they could probably save $2.4 billion, which they hadn't seen before. They then triaged it down and set teams off to go and accomplish different things. And that year, they actually made between 700 and 800 million of savings out of that $1 billion of ideas, $2.4 billion of ideas that they had. And basically what they saw was their minds were so filled with ideas about what they can't do or why things won't work, or we have to always do things this way because we've been doing them for 100 years. And they realized that that was just all their thinking. And they saw in a much deeper way how to clear their head and really look fresh. You know, what's true now? And what can we do about it? Really help them get out of the box. And it became a really fun, very enjoyable 2 days of getting insights in areas that really surprised them. And it turned out a lot of the ideas were ideas they had had before. But they didn't see how to get out of their own way to just entertain those ideas. So is that a good example?
It's a great example. And the question that comes up for me, the question that our listeners might have is that kind of a... Some people might be thinking to this, listening to this episode and thinking, sounds like you just did a strategy session with them. But what you're pointing to is something deeper than that, which is to get the most out of this kind of idea session. And is that something that is sustainable? So you worked with these leaders for 4 days. Was that kind of like a one-off, or we came up with a bunch of ideas because we used some strategies and techniques with them to see that it was just their thinking? Or has something fundamentally shifted for those leaders where they have ongoing more ability to access these ideas that they didn't have before and have less busy minds?
Well, the leader was a big fan of what we did. So when he ran his meetings, he kept the knowledge alive by the way he operated. And then we worked closely with all of the 22 people over the next 6 months to help them maintain what it is that they learned. And then we went with some of them into their teams to teach their teams. So some of the key teams that needed to do the work to make that money saved, we actually worked with their other teams to help their teams get out of their way, find their own insights in their areas, and then implement them. So it was a year and a half process, actually, that we were involved with a lot of them. It wasn't just the 4 days. So we do a lot of follow-up to keep the learning fresh and alive until it becomes more of a habit for them. When we go into companies, we commit to the result. We don't commit to a training process.
So it sounds like you're saying you work with people until this becomes ingrained, and so the shift that you're talking about is a sustainable shift.
As best we can. Well, we commit to the result. I mean, we committed to, helping this guy Peter get his $1 billion. Well, he was really happy with 700,000 because he had pulled $1 billion out of his hat. So, when he was able to make the savings that he did, everybody was thrilled.
So thank you for explaining that. It was a great case study. I'm sure you have loads more with all the experience and work that you've done. Just to finish up today, what's the one takeaway you want listeners to leave this episode with?
Well, if your listeners are new to this understanding, what I would say is there's great news. We've made some new discoveries about how the mind works, and hopefully it'll come to a theater near you sometime soon. For those of you that are somewhat familiar with this topic, what I'd say is keep looking deeper into this direction. And the more you can realize the deep intelligence that's operating from the inside out in your life, the easier and more successful everything will become.
Thank you for that, Ken. And if someone's listening to this and they'd like to get in touch with you, how might they do that?
I think they can, you can email me at km@insightprinciples.com or my partner Robin at rc@insightprinciples.com. Or you can look at our website, which is insightprinciples.com. If you're a coach or a consultant and you're interested in learning more about this, we have another business. We have a training business called the Insight Principles Institute. And you can look that up at insightprinciplesinstitute.com.
Thank you very much, Ken. Thank you for joining us. And I'll include all those details in the show notes. And I'll be back next time with another interviewee to talk about another topic relevant to business.
Thanks for having me, Ankush. This was fun.
Thanks for listening to the Business Series podcast. If you want to hear more, you can click on the subscribe button below. You can share this with someone else who can benefit, or you can like it and encourage others to listen. Also, it would be great if you left a comment below, as I love hearing from listeners and I want to keep creating great content for you. Thanks for listening.